CLEMONS.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Good to be with all of you. I'm Steve Clemons. I'm editor-at-large of The Hill in Washington, D.C., but I'm not going to make this too much about America. I'm with MIROSLAV LAJČÁK, of course, the foreign minister of Slovakia, a very distinguished politician, was president of the UN General Assembly from 2017 to 2018. We were just talking about the stress of those times and how interesting that was. And he was also a local boy, born here in Poprad. How do you like coming back home?
Oh, I do.
And does anybody know that he was born here? Any relatives in the room? No. So we're going to have a chat. This is the Tatra chat on an EU disrupted and sort of Slovakia's dashboard, if you will, looking at this. But I want to start with greetings from President Trump and Rudy Giuliani, who are just a little bit interested in whether you have anything on Hunter Biden in Slovakia. They love Slovakia. Slovakia is the greatest country if you have anything on Hunter Biden.
That's what they told us in White House. Not on Biden, but on Slovakia.
Well, yeah. Very, very good. So let me start just by asking you, in these complex times, I was very, very taken with Ivan Korchok's comments when the session opened yesterday. I don't think he liked my sending this tweet out and punctuating what he said. I see him right in the audience. But where he said this was a time where it was feeling not disruption, but destruction. And then last night, Donald Tusk said, it's not, what we're seeing now is disintegration and shrinkage in the relationship. These are very, very realistic and very pessimistic assessments of the time we're in. So I guess in this moment, where Slovakia is such a key member, you played this role in the UN General Assembly, hitting above its weight on so many levels, I'd like to get a sense of your strategic dashboard, not with the world so much, but really within the European Union and how you see the stress points right now.
Let me start with the global picture. And the fact is that, yes, there is a great disruption because we are moving from the system that we knew, which is called multilateralism system, which is based on rules. And the rules are respected, sometimes violated, but you can always point out to the ones who are violating them. But this is no longer true because we are moving from this system towards multipolarism, which means that all those who feel strong enough to pursue and to impose their interests are doing so regardless of rules and regardless of international law. And there is no longer an authority in this world able to say, you must not do it. Security Council is completely blocked, and each of the big players have violated the rules themselves. So what is happening now is that US is saying to the Russians, you have done this and that, and the Russians are saying, but you have done this and that. And this is where we are. So we are, Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, in his opening speech at the General Assembly, said that we are running into a risk of great fracture. That means we will have at least two realities existing independently, the American and Chinese, with independent currency, independent values, independent artificial intelligence, independent internet, everything. And so these will be the two big realities, and this is where we are marching. And there will be sub-realities created by sub-players such as Turkey or Russia and others. And of course, the big question is, where is the EU in this? And I think this is the crucial question right now. Because for me, the last 5 years, the mandate of the previous European Commission was a period of strategic confusion for the European Union. We were lost. We were unable to cope with the changes. We were unable to react properly. And we were kept in a reactive mode. Because, first of all, we were obviously shocked by the migration wave in 2015. And our reaction was slow and wrong because it was bureaucratic and administrative. And then the arrival of Donald Trump, and we spent too long time convincing ourselves that it's not as bad as it is, and that he will somehow be put in place, and things will be back to normal.
We're really sorry about that.
Well, you elected him, not us. But I mean, and we have to respect that. I mean, let's not question his legitimacy. But finally, we Europeans are waking up to the reality.
Right.
And instead of wishful thinking, instead of telling to ourselves what the Americans should do, or telling to you what is good for you, and that's not what you think, I mean, what your administration thinks right now, there is a strategic awakening in Europe right now, that I can feel that, understanding that we are on our own, and if we don't want to lose relevancy completely, we'll have to define what our priorities are, and we have to be able to stand up for them.
So let me ask you a delicate question then. I remember when Donald Trump was elected and there was a GlobeSec meeting was invited, and I'd had experiences with President Trump where I think he made it very clear that he himself personally was going to be, to say at the least, disinterested in global institutions, disinterested in NATO, disinterested. So I agree with you that these things were on the track. But I think the question goes back to this Kissinger question, and this is a delicate one related to your own role. Last night, President Tusk said that he has seen his job both as kind of bringing the European Union together, but also respecting its many sovereignties. And so I'm wondering whether those many sovereignties, including Slovakia's, having a foreign minister, helps or hurts your cause. When you have China, Russia, you have a world where there is not someone just driving that. Isn't it easier for me, if I were China, to pick off Slovakia or Hungary or Russia to do the same, or others, because you're not speaking with a single voice?
Yes, I believe that...
We were going to keep this mild and light, but
Yeah.
he set the tone.
You said the tone. So I think with the arrival of Donald Trump, we have shifted from three-dimensional policy into two-dimensional policy. And the third dimension that is missing is the one where we have the vision, the values, the principles. And the two that are left are about interests, transactions. And this is the sad reality. This is not how European Union works. It is not how we function. And this is a very difficult question we have to ask for ourselves. How are we going to function in this two-dimensional world? As for Slovakia, we don't have this dilemma. We don't feel we have lost sovereignty being part of the European Union and Eurozone. We are perfectly, comfortable being in Eurozone and in every possible integration that exists within the European Union. So I think it's an artificial dilemma, and I very much agree with the words of Donald Tusk at the dinner last night. We are stronger and we are more sovereign when the European Union is stronger and more united.
You know, the Carnegie Council recently came out and said the big problems right now in Europe that they're distracted by, in his words, and I'm not sure I agree with this analyst, they say, we talk a lot about Brexit, we've had forums here on Brexit, populism and migration, which seem like immediate large concerns that are driving a lot of the political edge in Europe. But this writer said the other big issues that are coming are climate, aging population, and the digital revolution. And I don't think we have time to take on all of those. I find it interesting because I read about Slovakia essentially being the fourth oldest in relative age for those over 65 in proportion to the rest of their population. So you have an aging population, you have a talented population, but it's an interesting question. Of course, climate is there, but you mentioned AI a minute ago, and we've had some scattering of comments through this forum about 5G. And this is another arena. When you look at a strategic leap of the next platform, which we will retrofit cities and we will embed sensors all throughout our lives, and it creates incredible potential opportunities for mankind in that world. There are also significant risks. And I'm interested in, since you did mention AI, which is quantum computing, AI, 5G all together, and just significant changes, how do you see Europe right now, and Slovakia in particular, playing a role in that? Or are you more victim and more passively engaged in that process rather than one helping to define the edge?
I don't like, posing ourselves as victims. I don't think we are victims of anything. We are part of every problem or every solution, and that's what we are trying to be. But what you said, I see as two parallel tasks. When we speak about digitalization or addressing the climate change, artificial intelligence, this is where Europe is very good at. And we are very eager to play a role and to play a leading role. But at the same time, we cannot ignore the fact that Brexit is still here, and the migration is still here, and the issue of security and terrorism is still here. And this is plaguing us, our citizens, and we cannot fully focus on these global agendas where we are really predestined to be leaders until and unless we have dealt with Brexit and also with migration. Because it's also, first of all, Brexit takes lots of our intellectual and administrative capacity, and the issue of migration is the one that decides whether we have support of our citizens or not. So you see, European Union is the leader in addressing the climate change, and we wish the others be able to follow. And when it comes to technological advancement, this is our playing field. This is where we are really strong. But we really need to address these basic existential issues first, or do it in parallel so that they do not hamper our effort on this noble global challenge.
Let me ask you about the 5G situation for a minute, and I don't know if I'm up to date on the latest in Slovakia. At the German Marshall Fund's Brussels Forum, I interviewed Dieter Renders, I think you were there, about 5G, and Belgium has decided to become one of the research centers for Huawei. And this is, of course, the host to NATO. So significant tension in the U.S.-Belgium relationship over that. I think Slovakia has said that it doesn't see a security threat from Huawei. The Czech Republic has said that it does worry a little bit about it, and Poland has arrested a Huawei employee for spying. And so I'm interested not to say that I even agree with the determination about Huawei, but it seems to be becoming a line that countries are either on one side or the other. And if you're not going to help with Hunter Biden, Mike Pompeo said, hey, if you want to be a really good friend of ours, of the Americans, give up Huawei. Do you think, is that the way it's unfolding?
We would love to have help with Hunter Biden, but I don't think he has ever visited Slovakia, so I don't think we have any file on him. Yeah. And on Huawei, in a way, we are lucky because we are too small to be of interest for China. They are not really here. The Chinese presence, both when it comes to trade and investment, represent like 0.1% of their overall presence in the European Union. So we do not deal with the 5G issue yet. We have not have a strategic discussion about it. There is no decision at the level of the government about how are we going to proceed. We definitely don't want to be part of the problem. We are following very carefully what's happening in a number of countries, including in Hungary, and we want to have a European position. I was very pleased that in March, European Union was able to adopt a strategy on China, a credible one, a reasonable one, a good one. And now I would like to see this strategy operational, including in our joint approach to the 5G networks. I really don't want to see each of us adopting our different national strategies. So, and we have the luxury of time, as I said, because we are not there yet. So before taking the strategic decision how to address the 5G network issue, we will definitely have this very serious political discussion.
We're going to go to all of you in just a minute, so get your questions ready. But I want to ask a question that deals with Russia and your relationship with Russia. And I guess, how do I want to frame this? I want to be careful here. GlobeSec is an extraordinary organization. I've been very proud to be involved at the edge of what it does. It hits so much above its weight in what it does. And it reminds me in a way, and this is not going to make sense to my friends in GlobeSec, but just bear with me, to like a North Korea, right? North Korea hits way above its weight in meddling in cyber in other countries. It screwed up Sony Corporation for a while. And you see some places with not a lot of resources able to create, to move the needle, if you will. And I've always been intrigued with North Korea's ability to mess with others, or Iran or others. And I'm wondering why good countries like Slovakia, that you just made the point is smaller, may not have the same resources, but you have a GlobeSec, interestingly. I also understand why you can't have sort of an internet, research foundation or something like Russia does. So is Russia meddling in the public attitudes arena in various countries like Slovakia, why you can't turn it around as a country with smart people and begin meddling with Russia's insides and its own views. In other words, why aren't you responding in kind to Russia?
Because we are not Russia, we are a democratic country, and we are transparent, We are accountable to our people. We have independent media. So all these things do not allow for this kind of activities.
That's a great answer, by the way. I didn't know how you were going to respond, but really good answer.
But speaking about Russia,
yeah.
we Europeans have put ourselves in a corner here. And we are still in a state of hysteria, because if you are not Russia-phobe, you are immediately labeled Putinist. So if you don't hate Putin, that means you must love him. And if you try to say, I mean, let's use common sense, and let's put the facts on the table, and let's discuss how are we doing, you are already looked at with great suspicion. So you want to lift the sanctions? This is the question immediately. No, I don't want to lift the sanctions. I want to discuss the sanctions. We have imposed the sanctions 5 years ago. So isn't it legitimate to look at the results? What have we delivered and what have we not delivered? Have we increased our leverage, our influence over Russia, or decreased? Have we managed to change Russia's behavior or not? So I'm definitely not in favor of, I mean, lifting the sanctions would kill our credibility. But, I mean, why are we scared of discussing our Russia? We don't have Russia policy. I mean, we have China strategy, we don't have Russia strategy. And that means we are irrelevant. And this is not good for the European Union.
And just finally, for me, what is the state of the wave of populism right now as you see it? I remember again, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, when Emmanuel Macron spoke at a GlobeSec forum, and he broke into English, and I was watching from Washington on Facebook. I mean, it was great that you guys stream on Facebook. And Macron said the populist leaders in Europe are lying to their publics. It was an incredibly powerful moment. And since that, not because of that speech, but since that, there have been some losses for the populists. It sort of seems that there's been some progress made. And I'm wondering if that's a false illusion, or whether you think things are structurally there, or the worry is still that the trend is still rising.
Look, we are still struggling to define what populism is. And I'm afraid that for some, populism is every opinion you don't like. And that's wrong. For me, populism is the attitude when you criticize things, but you are unable to offer an alternative, a better one. And this is what populists do. Our populists here in Slovakia are questioning our membership in NATO, are very critical of the European Union, but they were never able to come up with a better solution because there is none. And I really think that there are people who, I mean, listen to them, who may find their views attractive, but on the day of the poll, you realize that you know what you have, and these guys are offering, nothing, and you would not vote for that nothing, to risk losing what you have in exchange for something that is not even defined. And for me, the best way of confronting populism is exactly, so what do you propose? I mean, what do you offer? What's your solution? And how do you want to achieve it? Because they might have some kind of solutions. I want the European Union to listen to us more. How do you want to do it? I mean, we are there. We are part of every solution or every decision the EU makes. So we are sitting there. So what else do you want to do? And this is the best way how to confront populism, because obviously they are offering very easy solutions to very complicated problems. There are no shortcuts to solving problems. At the same time, we, like mainstream politicians, must have no taboo issues. And this is because this is also the fertile ground for, if we don't speak about certain things because it's not politically correct, then obviously we are creating space for others to come and to say what people feel, and when they don't get it from us, then they would listen to the others. And then we blame them that they are populists, but we've made it possible for them. So I really believe that we must not run away from itchy issues.
What's your favorite politically incorrect issue?
I will not say. This discussion is being streamlined, I'm not saying.
Okay, let me open to the audience. Questions, thoughts, comments? Yes, right here. And we're going to bring a microphone to you, because hopefully we're streaming on Facebook Live. Yes.
Thank you very much. Nicholas White from APCO Worldwide, but in a personal capacity.
Terrific.
Minister LAJČÁK has been very visible in one area that we've barely touched on, which is the Western Balkans, and in particular Now we have the EU winding itself into yet another corner with France and the Netherlands wanting to delay or indeed not even ever open negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. Meanwhile, in Kosovo, we've had an election result that has brought the most radical political party in Kosovo probably leading the new government, an area that I know Minister LAJČÁK knows very well. Can the EU restore its credibility in the Western Balkans?
Great question.
We will see in 3 days from now, on Tuesday in Luxembourg, where we have this discussion, and we should make the decision to open or to invite North Macedonia and Albania to start accession negotiations. Our position is very clear. We must do that. Because with this decision, we will invite them to enter into a process that we fully control. So we decide when they are ready and to complete and to join the European Union. If we don't invite them, that means, first of all, we have lost part of our leverage, and we have lost a huge part of our credibility. And how can we, European Union, aspire to be a global player if we are unable to deal or to be in a lead when it comes to our neighborhood? Plus, the Americans have now appointed 2 envoys for the Balkans, and we will decide to stop the process of integration. So does it mean we are inviting the United States to sort out the Balkans for us? Will we like the way that they will sort it out? So, I mean, it's incredibly irresponsible, and I say irresponsible because I don't want to say stupid. I mean, we all... Oh, I just said it.
It's what we call a tweetable moment.
But it is. We all know how brave the Macedonians were. At that time, they were still called Macedonians. With helping us to address the migration crisis. This was the border that protected us. Are they going to do the same if we send them a signal that we don't care about them? There is a wrong opinion inside of the European Union, in certain circles, believing that their problems are their problems, and we have to deal with our problems first. And I even heard some high-profile leaders of the European Union telling the Western Balkans leaders, guys, I understand you have your problems, but we need to sort out our problems first. And I said, this is totally wrong, because they are part of our solutions of our problems when it comes to migration, terrorism, energy, you name it. So I really hope that common sense and responsibility, and also the feeling for the global role of the European Union will prevail on Tuesday.
Thank you for that great question. Yes, at the back.
Milan Nič, German Council on Foreign Relations. I have a follow-up question to the previous one. Josef Warrell, the nominated EU High Representative, during his hearing announced that his first visit will go to Pristina. And I wonder, what do you think about that? If it's a good move, if he goes only to Pristina and not also to Belgrade, given his mandate. And the second question is about Donbass and the upcoming Normandy 4 summit. Slovakia has had a presidency of the OSCE and was heavily involved in the occupied areas. What's your lessons learned from that period that should be taken into consideration at the Normandy summit?
Thank you.
First, I had lunch with Josef Warrell 3 or 4 days before his hearing, and he told me about this idea to pay his first visit to Pristina. And I told him that I understand the message he wants to send, being a Spaniard, but my recommendation for him would be to visit the region early enough and visit Pristina as part of the visit to the region. And I also told him that before going to the Western Balkans, my suggestion would be to visit Ukraine as a first country, because we have a real conflict in Ukraine. We have many problems in the Western Balkans, but people are not dying there. People are dying in Ukraine. And this brings me to the second part of your question. We are at the crossroads in Ukraine right now. I mean, I've been there three times during this year. I really believe that President Zelensky means it, both when it comes to addressing the problem of corruption and ending the war. And we all say, yes, perfect, we support. Now, he has made concrete steps. He has generated pressure on Russia because it was so easy for the Russians to put all the blame on Poroshenko and do nothing. Now they are forced to go along. Agreement on the Steinmeier's formula is a breakthrough. It's a huge step forward because you got the way how to read the Minsk agreements, and that was missing. But you see, it immediately generates a strong pushback in Ukraine. Not everybody is happy with it. And I really believe that if we want peace in Ukraine, if we want end of the conflict, we have to support massively President Zelensky now. Because if we allow this momentum to be lost and this process to be stopped, then we will have the same. For the rest of his mandate, we will have the mess, the carnage, people will be losing their lives, and there will be no end of the conflict inside. And this is the time when we really have to help.
On Donbass, who's the least constructive player right now?
I will answer in a different way. What we need to do now is to make sure that the leaders of Normandy Group will meet. And right now I understand that 3 out of 4 agreed. They already agreed on the 16th of September. President Putin had scheduling problems, so he was unable to participate. So I hope he will be able to solve his scheduling problem, because we need the leaders to meet, and we need strong signal, strong impetus for the continuation of the process.
Yes, right here.
Thank you, Andrea Matuszak, David Pravda. Following on Biden, I hope President Trump will not find out that Joe Biden was calling Slovakia in 2014 about gas reverse flow to Ukraine, because when he finds out, I'm hopefully he will not, because probably will be in the news. But serious now.
You just made it public, you see.
Yes.
It's a joke. Yeah, joke.
Yeah, it's a joke. Or not.
Just like that.
Can you please elaborate a bit on what you just said, that we have to massively support President Zelensky? What does it mean? What kind of tools we have? What can we do? And one quick question about discussion about foreign policy in the EU. What's the position of Slovakia? Your position on debate, changing rules about making decision about the foreign policy in the EU, because we have unanimity. So do you think that it's time to change it?
Thank you. And if you can answer both of those in 1 minute, that would be terrific.
I can. First, we have to say that adoption of Steinmeier's formula does not put the Ukraine's sovereignty in danger. It's not giving in to Russia. Steinmeier's formula was proposed 3 years ago, and Steinmeier's formula also understands that for organizing local elections, you have to have full sovereignty and full control. And I don't hear these voices. So President Zelensky needs strong voices from all over the world to say this. It was a great move, great step, and absolutely not against the sovereignty and national interests of Ukraine. And second, on qualified majority vote, look, we in Slovakia never refuse to discuss things. We hate when things are imposed upon us without being part of the discussion. So it was like sort of mentioned, but no follow-up. So we are not scared of any discussion, and we will define our red lines during that discussion. But as I said, there has been no follow-up so far.
Let me just finally ask you a question, because I think it deserves just the last minute of attention. On Turkey and President Tusk tweeting that Turkey was engaged with ethnic cleansing. I know that Europe is going to come together. I know Europe has been engaged with Turkey in trying to deal with migration problems, and Turkey is saying, give us money as we watch this ethnic cleansing happen, which unfortunately the United States in part had a hand in giving a green light to. Just very quickly, how is Europe going to respond?
Well, I really believe that this is the moment when European Union should demonstrate that we are not weak, and we believe in our principles, and we are going to stand up for our principles. And we will have this discussion on Turkey on Monday at the foreign ministers level, and then Thursday and Friday at the leaders level. So we will get the answer about it.
So what would standing up for principles look like?
Well, this is the violation of international law. This is aggression against Syria. This is overstepping of of the rules of behavior. And this is also blackmailing of the European Union, because saying that if I don't get your blessing and your money, then I will send you the 3.5 million migrants. And this is not the game we should accept.
And with that, you're back in your hometown. Are you going to take us this afternoon to any of your home hiking trails in the mountains and show us the best paths? Did you go up these mountains when you were a kid?
Many times. I mean, still, every time I can.
Ladies and gentlemen, MIROSLAV LAJČÁK, Foreign Minister of Slovakia, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Panel discussion on the latest developments in trade policy. My name is Joanna Sapinska. I'm a senior correspondent, trade correspondent at MLEX in Brussels, and I have a pleasure to lead this discussion today. Let me first introduce our distinguished panelists. We have Mr. Jörg Wuttke, President of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China. Welcome. Please take your seat.
On this side?
Yes, please. We have Mr. Bo Yin, who is an Executive Director of Europe Office at Global Energy Interconnection Development and Cooperation Organization. Welcome. We have Mr. Biswajit Banerjee, Chief Economist at the National Bank of Slovakia, who previously worked also with the IMF. Welcome.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Mr. Gordon Bainai, who is currently a chairman of Global Advisory Board at Campbell Lutyens in London, formerly Prime Minister of Hungary. Welcome, gentlemen. The idea of this discussion is to make it as inclusive as possible, so I will take a couple of questions from the audience, somewhere half through our discussion. We have just about 40 minutes left, so let's get started now, because we have a lot of questions to answer. After years of staying in the shadow of other policies, more urgent policies like energy, migration, or competition, trade has come to the fore and became one of the hottest topics around the globe. Unfortunately, most of this new fame or public attention is due to Mr. President Donald Trump's very aggressive America First policy, which has thrown the US into a trade war with China and the EU and could soon also paralyze the World Trade Organization's dispute settlement system. I have heard quite many speakers mentioning trade wars yesterday and today as one of the major concerns. The question is whether can it get any worse? But I would like to get an answer to this question at the very end of our discussion. First, I would like to ask Mr. Banerjee for an audit where we are at the moment. What's the scale of all this of a damage which all these restrictions, trade restrictions, are causing to the global economy?
Thank you. Well, the way I see it is what you see today, it's not surprising. If you go back in economic history, it had happened. Until the time the gold standard failed following the starting of the First World War, you had a backlash against globalization. So what you see now is you had rapid growth in globalization. People had called it hyper-globalization. But sentiments towards globalization had begun to already cool down. So what I see now happening is a backlash against globalization. If you listen to Mr. Trump and pay close attention to the words he uses the word sovereignty. He wants his sovereignty back. So he wants greater maneuverability of the national government scope, and it has to be balanced against the rules of the global market, and this also accounts for his resistance and opposition to the WTO. So going forward, therefore, what is going to be important is that the implication of this, the backlash against globalization, in order to work it out, has become so difficult because the nature of globalization has got embedded in terms of global value chains. And these chains have increased, the length of the chain has increased, you have backward linkages, you have forward linkages. So the traditional model of foreign direct investment going and seeking a market is just a small part. So if you look back in terms of foreign direct investment of Japan in the 1980s, when the likes of Sony and Honda and Toyota, in order to overcome the pressure of exchange rate appreciation of the yen, they moved their production to the American market. Now you find that if a tariff war is introduced, the country which is sending the final product this amount of impact it will have is only going to be a fraction of it, depending on how many other places it gets its input from. So if you have, let's take the case of US introducing tariff on EU cars, and German cars are exported directly, but the inputs, 40% comes from Poland. The impact of the tariff is going to be faced by the Polish manufacturer to some extent, not fully by Germany. So in order to figure out what's happening, it's not just slowdown in growth, but the effect on employment also has to be taken into account. And that, in a way, is going to be more painful.
Let's bring in Mr. Wütke to this discussion. China is the main target of the aggressive U.S. policy. There are Chinese companies which suffer, especially the exporters, but also the EU companies with factories, production plants in China. Could you tell us a little bit about how do these companies deal with this new situation, with this ongoing U.S.-China trade war, how they are affected, what do they do? Do they relocate their production?
Well, first of all, I'm chairing the European Chamber. We just launched a survey beginning of this week where we ask our members, how do you deal with this? What's your impact? And actually the impact in comparison to a survey we did in September last year was very minor, surprisingly. 5%, 6% are thinking about moving out of China, and 8% are moving into China, possibly from the US. And other places. So in a way, there is an impact, but the impact is more severe when it comes to, for example, European companies in the US. The largest exporter from cars from the US is BMW and Mercedes-Benz, 150,000 cars a year, and that is pretty much dead and it's very hard to substitute due to the kind of cars they're selling. And of course, then this whole supply chain in the US gets hit. For us, in our world in China, of course we're hit. I mean, hardly any of the European companies exports, but we have lots of customers, like in chemicals, myself, that are in textiles, shoes. China exports every year 2 billion pairs of shoes, and electronics and packaging and so forth. So we are definitely hit indirectly, even though we put up shop in China for China. And the other interesting thing is for us to see that actually when you ask our American friends and peers that have invested in China, not a single company has any disadvantage. So the Chinese actually do not touch American companies or make their life more miserable in the customary manner of more audits and this and that and so forth, which is telling because that's possibly exactly what Trump wants the Chinese to do in order to drive the American companies back home onto American soil. So in a way, the flip side of that is, as the Americans are left alone, fair enough, is we have no advantage as European companies. And the imports from the US that are coming in, we don't have soya beans in that kind of quantity. So the way the overlap is little. So in short, actually, the damage is done in the supply chain in the US as well as in China. It's millions for many companies. But the worst is that when we ask our members, what are you what is the response to all of this? 15% they delayed foreign direct investment in China as well as elsewhere. Meaning the real impact of the trade war is wait and see, which in itself already is not good. But let me just add another thing to it. The trade war is one thing. And what actually bothers us far more is something which is possibly not going to be solved very soon. It's the tech war, the kind of attempt of the Americans to decouple China. So the trade war, you can see possibly, light agreements like yesterday and so forth. The trade war is a bothering background noise. What really scares the hell out of us is the tech war.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Bowen, I'm sure you have a good insight into what is happening to the Chinese energy companies back home. So can you tell us how are they impacted by the U.S.-China war?
Well, I guess I'm the only Chinese in this room, but I have to highlight I'm not representing the Chinese government or the government authority. Actually, I'm working for an NGO established in Beijing. It's called Global Energy Interconnection. So actually, we are aiming to build up interconnections to improve connectivity. So it's obviously against the trade war. And our members, most of the members actually are not Chinese companies. We have Siemens, we have ABB, we have Volkswagen. We have a lot of big companies where we are trying to get together to facilitate an energy transition to use more renewable energies by build a globally interconnected power grid, because we believe that in the future, when the electrification is increasing, we will use definitely 100% renewable energy generated, electricity generated by renewables. And actually, most of our members are international companies, so they're willing to go abroad to extend their businesses overseas, out of China. So definitely they are suffered from this kind of trade war, because actually the currency exchange rate is not stable, the market is not stable. But on the other hand, I can see actually there's a lot of opportunities for us to enhance our cooperation in Europe, because actually in energy sector it's a kind of different story. Most of the leading companies are actually in Europe and in China. In China, one of our members, that is SGCC, State Grid Corporation of China, they have the best transmission technology for long distance. That is the ultra high voltage technology. And Siemens and ABB, they are best manufacturers for equipments for such kind of long distance transmission lines. And another one, like Prysmian, that is largest cable manufacturer in the world. They also produce the best submarine cable for transmissions. And another one is Vestas. I think most of you would know that. It's the leading company for wind farms, for wind generation. And there are a lot of other companies that are trying to improve the Baltic Sea wind generation, the North Sea. And we can see that there are a lot of companies in Europe, they are trying to improve the hydrogen technology as well. And we can see that actually the leading companies are in Europe and China. Actually, US is kind of slow in energy sector, especially when we're talking about interconnection. Even inside US, actually, for different states, the grid is not interconnected at all. But as far as we know, the US also has a very large landscape, so the renewable energy resource is not evenly distributed. So we think that there are actually a great chances for us to work together, because we all have technologies. The only thing we have to do is to open our doors, and only if we become more open to each other, then we can work together. Because actually I noticed a very interesting figure that the value of trade between China and Germany in the first half of this year has actually increased more than 4%, and the number reached up to actually 99 billion.
And this brings me to another question, which is to Mr. Bainai. There's this old saying where two quarrel, a third wins. So my question is whether the U.S.-China war is an opportunity for the EU companies, whether it's rather a threat or opportunity.
Well, let me take a step back and take it up from where Mr. Wittke said. I don't think it's a trade war. Trade war is one of the streams through which a global strategic historic conflict is played out for who is running the world, who is the dominant power in the world. This is not a new development. There is this famous American scientist, Graham Allison, who wrote a full book about the Thucydides trap, where an emerging power is challenging the leading global power for the world dominance. And there is a huge realization in the US in the last couple of years, which goes well beyond President Trump. Actually, I think he's just a face of it, but it is a consensus between Democrats and Republicans, and not just the foreign policy strategists. The business elite has turned in that. The technology elite, the military and defense elite are practically united that this is the last moment for the United States to stop China overtaking the global dominant role and breaking up the multilateral system which the United States has built after the Second World War and has been dominating. Put it simply, I could say that the question is who sets the rules and who takes the rules. And that's what the fight is going for. And trade is just one channel to play it out. There are multiple channels, technology, more important than trade. Finance and investment. This is the first year when China became a net, in the last 10 years, when China became a net seller of foreign direct investment globally. So not continuing to grow in the world, but actually selling out of investments. But finance and investment would include currencies. Who controls the currency? The US has the extraordinary privilege, extraorbitant privilege of having the dollar as the global reserve currency. China, if it wants to set the rules, it has to find ways. The renminbi cannot be the reserve currency because that would break China's restrictions on its own financial markets. They have to find another way. So trade, tech, finance and investment, military and defense and national security, a huge issue. And then which will lead me into your question, global alliances. China traditionally is a country who has 0 allies around the world. It has marriages of interest, but traditional value-based alliances, military alliances are far from China. China is a country which has a 4,000-year-old governance, the Mandarin system, basically uninterrupted. But China didn't have a foreign ministry until 1863, when after the Opium Wars, they realized they need to deal with the outside world. So China doesn't have an alliance, right, as the US have, or some argue had one, and several ones, NATO, ASEAN, and others. Donald Trump is challenging and breaking those up at the moment, I think. Think about what's happening in Syria and what other people think about whether it's worth allying with the US long-term or not. If you are a Kurd, you understand what I'm saying. But so China, the China trade war will immediately put traditional US allies, if the war escalates, into a position where they need to choose whose side are you on. Australia, South Korea, Japan, the ASEAN countries economically are equally or more exposed to China, the China trade, than to the US trade. And Europe is still more exposed to the US trade, increasingly dependent on China. And when push comes to shove in world conflicts, you are asked whose side are you on, if there are embargoes, sanctions, all that stuff. So for Europe, since Donald Trump became president, there were 2 major issues where Europe found itself in bed with China against the US: climate change and trade, world trade. Europe's position is closer to China, where it wants to maintain and operate this system, whereas Donald Trump is questioning that. So it's a very tense and inflectious moment for us. And Europe is hugely exposed. And to finish my long introduction on Europe, whereas US and China struggle for the global dominance, for Europe the question is whether Europe can, in the next 30 years, while this conflict will play out, whether Europe can remain at the table where decisions are made, or will find itself on the menu at the table, because that's the real question. And for Europe to remain relevant, it has to be united with its huge market and use its market leverage and tech leverage as a negotiating point with the US and with China.
A very good question. I'm afraid Mr. Banerjee would have to answer it, because I wanted to hear from you about what the strategy the EU should apply to China, because now we see it has been trying a conciliatory strategy, talking, trying to negotiate, but it doesn't bring results. So does it mean that the EU would have to strengthen, toughen its stance on China?
I don't see the problem China-specific. I would like to think more of it is what is required for Europe to be one single market, have the size and scale which will allow it to be an economic power, which through it will also give it the political clout that it requires. If you focus your attention to China, you run the risk of upsetting your current allies. That's the way I see it. You have to bring it together. Second, yesterday when we were talking on the future of industry, the point was made that there are cultural differences, right? I think the cultural difference between China and Europe is more striking and more contrasting than the cultural differences between the United States and Europe. So one has to function in that way. And if Chinese find that their markets are getting shut to the United States, and they are already criticized for foreign direct investment going to states with questionable governance because they want access to resources, what is going to be the driving motive for trade and foreign direct investment in Europe? If the technological differences are where China has an edge, you might soon find itself that they are more competitive, Europe is less competitive, and if that situation persists, there will be a backlash against Chinese FDI in Europe. Mm-hmm. So that would only persist, this global war that you have. So in a multi sort of national context, the way forward would be you cannot go back to the hyper-globalization state. You don't want to go back to the autarkic state. You have to strike a balance in between where the space for national governments to maneuver is given. So you want smart globalization. You don't want complete globalization. And so the international agencies and bodies have a role to play. The negotiations would be in terms of negotiating the room to maneuver. The sovereignty aspects have to be there. So I wouldn't sort of, say you are either on my side or that side, and I wouldn't focus narrowly on one partner or the other.
Mm-hmm. And staying still with European issues, there is a new commission coming in soon. There will be a new commissioner, most probably Mr. Phil Hogan, who is perceived as a heavyweight politician. Mr. Wutke, how do you see Mr. Hogan? Is he a good fit for Europe to stand up to both China and the US?
Well, I met Phil just 10 days ago in order to sort of square off for his parliamentary questioning, because a lot was supposed to be China. He's the best possible person. He's a tough cookie. He's also going to be tough on the Brits with Brexit. Now, the problem we have is, of course, Phil said to me, I'm going to be on my first trip when I'm commissioner on the 3rd and 4th of November in Shanghai. And now, we have no commissioner on the 1st of November, so here goes my China trip of the commissioner. So that's typical Europe always. You have a good guy, you have a good idea, and then bang, they find something to derail it. And we need someone who actually can be candid but diplomatic, because this investment agreement Europe has been discussing with China, I mean, this is very narrow. The base idea is that whatever China can do in Europe, we can do in China, has been going on for 36 rounds. And it's very, very small progress. And at the same time, the Europeans concluded a free trade agreement with Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and Singapore, and so forth. So it shows that possibly it's not Europe's problem. China simply hasn't found the political guts and clout in order to open up itself. And so for us, when you ask the question of what Europe can do, the BDI and the European Commission have done a great job in saying China is a partner. You know, we export, we import, we welcome them as investors in Europe, primarily the private-owned enterprises. Then it is a competitor. Competition is cool. I mean, we really grow innovative because of Chinese stress, and we operate in China in order to enrich our Europeans. So competition is not bad. And they're a rival, meaning that they have practices which we cannot agree on. And like state-owned enterprises entering our market in Europe, you know, after 30 years of trying to get rid of our state-owned enterprises, they come back through the back door, but this time with a different passport. And so we have to really consider that there are three options. The BDI made it very clear in this paper. China is our Sputnik moment. They are very, very good in many ways. We have to wake up. And maybe we have to find a visionary like JFK who responded to the Sputnik moment by saying, we put a guy on the moon within the same decade. I wonder who that person will be.
Thank you. And now questions from the audience. Who would like to come in with a question or a short comment? Please introduce yourself and your affiliation, and please be brief as possible. Is there anyone? No? Okay.
No, there is one lady.
At the back. Okay, sorry, I haven't seen. Please, we have a microphone here. Lady at the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Katarína. I'm the chief of the Foreign Affairs Committee at the National Council of the Slovak Republic. And I would like to ask our distinguished panelists, I liked very much what Mr. Bajnai said about Europe remaining at the table and being at the table where decisions are made rather than on the menu. I think we know at least how to do it politically. We have to be really, truly united. We have to have a truly single common foreign policy. We need to do something like a European army or to have a common army politically, but how to do it economically. I don't think that we are as competitive as the US or China or other players in technology, innovation. At this very conference last year, we discussed that the capital markets in Europe are not ready to finance innovation as much as they are in the US, for example. So what would you suggest that Europe would do and we Europeans do in order to be a competitor worth the competition and in order to remain at the table also economically and in technological innovation? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to answer this question? Mr. Bajnai.
Happy to start. So I think Europe has to become more assertive and more sovereign. Europe has to give up expecting others to solve its problems, be it defense and military. And Europe has to adapt to a more geopolitical world. We are returning to probably to a degree to the 19th century global politics, real politics. And Europe has to realize that and stop dreaming. I think it's happening. In economic terms, Europe is not as bad as we often talk about ourselves. For example, who is going to be the winner? So Huawei, let's take a concrete example. Huawei is a very good example of how this technology war is played out. Huawei is not about a company. It's about who controls the infrastructure of the 21st century, which is 5G. The whole Internet of Things is going to run on 5G. The US is worried about China owning the infrastructure of the 21st century on US soil. But the US doesn't have any companies who produce the hardware for 5G. If it's not Huawei, it can only be Nokia or Siemens Ericsson or Alstom, maybe some Korean companies. So there will be winners even of the trade war in terms of technology. and Europe could, in certain segments, be a winner. The second, Europe has the world's most interesting market. The kind of number of people times GDP per capita, it's the most interesting market to penetrate into. You have to use it as a trading power and not just naively let everybody in. And Europe is doing a good job with this bilateral trade agreement. Yeah. Third point, what's Europe's weakness? Go back to the trade war. Why is trade war now the first channel where this global conflict is played out? Because if you look at exports to GDP, the US exports to GDP is 12%. China is 18%, so much more exposed to exports. Europe is 42%. So we are much more exposed to trading with the world than anybody else, including China. For us, it's the biggest problem if trade breaks up. But on the other hand, we can use our market, our internal market, as a negotiating power with others and stay relevant.
Thank you so much. We are approaching the end of this discussion. So I would like to go back to my first question, whether it could get any worse. So I'd like all the panelists to take out your imaginary crystal balls and say in 3 minutes each, what's your view, what could happen next?
You want me to?
Yes, please. You are warmed up.
Okay. I think. Thank you. Right. I think it will get worse. It will be long. I think because it's not a trade war, not a tactical problem, it's a strategic conflict. It will be probably the next few decades before it's decided. It's unclear who is going to win this in terms of US and China and where Europe will end up in this.
So it's not just Mr. Trump?
No, it's not. That's a misunderstanding. It was a misunderstanding for a while, and I think China now understands it's not Trump. It's the whole US decision-making elite, and therefore China is trying to adapt to it. The deal that they announced yesterday is small and tactical, which Trump needs because Trump is constrained by, and US politics, by 4-year short-term cycles, whereas China is not. But to finish this sentence on what's going to happen. What's going to happen is this problem can only be solved if people stop looking at this as a zero-sum game. At the moment, both China and the US looks at this as a zero-sum game, and in a zero-sum game, you cannot retreat. If they find, and you need maybe not a Kennedy moment, but a Kissingerian moment going back to the 1970s, you need a foreign policy initiative which switches this game to a positive sum game. In that case, you could renegotiate the whole agreement. That will be, I guess, further down the road, probably many years.
Mr. Panji.
Well, in a way, the challenges forward is, you can summarize it in terms of the topics which have been discussed in the GlobSec conference. So trade is obviously one thing, the international economic order. The die is cast. You cannot have the growth of globalization at the pace that it was growing. It's like it is going to slow down. So that aspect of export-led growth is going to be less important. And as he said, that you have to rebalance your economy, and certainly Europe has the possibility of increasing its market size because quite a lot of the supply chains are within Europe. That's one thing. The second thing is, even as this trade war or trade tensions are continuing, we face challenges of technological change. That has certain implications. Who are the leaders who are developing the technology and who are the ones who are able to implement the technology? Those who are able to implement the technology faster and adapt to it will obviously go ahead in the race compared to the others. And then you have other constraining factors, which in the short run will be constraining. Climate change, because that's going to change the way you live down the road. So how you adapt your production setup, how you adapt the way you live is going to be all dependent on it. So it's one big thing. Uncertain times, during uncertain times, people are scared, so investment and elsewhere, it's not going to follow the traditional method.
Thank you. Please.
Joanna, I can imagine you want to hear a happy end.
Of course.
This is the last panel, so I'll be on an optimistic note. But I couldn't agree more than what you said before. The trade war is a sideshow, important, big, and it's Trump. The tech war is Congress, is bipartisan. That's there to stay. And that's going to force all of us to reconsider what we want. I mean, the upside is we Europeans possibly have a great chance in order to be more assertive, to be more finding our own identity and reach out, as we did over the last years in free trade agreements, to the East Asians, Southeast Asians, in order to see that we can do stuff together. After all, Japan is not a small economy, and see how we develop this without getting sucked into the American issue of are you with us or are you against us? This is always the dangerous thing on 5G, for example. So I would say we have a great technology base. Myself, representing a company which is globally #1, we still have global champions. But boy, it's now time to really get our act together on reforms. So I'm a bit pessimistic about the tech war and the implications, but I'm very optimistic about Europe getting its act together.
Yes, and now we want to hear from the...
Yeah, and actually I just mentioned when I speak at first time, I still think that actually there are great opportunity for us to cooperate. We are not just compete for one piece of cake, actually we can make the cake bigger. That's what we're thinking, especially regarding with the renewable energy. There is big potential in China or in Europe as well. As I said, both China and Europe are actually leading the renewable energy industry. We have advantages, both of us, and if we work together, then we can find very good solution for climate change, for energy transition. And actually, we are trying to find some new opportunities in Latin America, in Africa as well. I think that is also another opportunity. Even though China is, has this kind of trade war against America, but we can still turn to some other places which are badly needed for technologies, for capitals, for investments, for infrastructures, like Africa. And I still remember yesterday there was a youngest speaker, Alexander. He's asking why we are here. We're not representing ourselves, but we are fighting for someone else in the world. We want to make this. We want to make this world a better place. So, regarding with Africa, this is also one of the concern our organization is trying to promote. Actually, only if we have the market outside Africa, then we can develop as much as renewable energy in Africa. Then the people there can benefit for that. And actually, the European people can use much more cheaper energy as well. So let's do not bring too much political thinking into private sector. That is what I want to highlight. Actually, we have a lot of members, more than 800. What we are trying to do is actually build connectivity, as I said. No matter what kind of political competition they are doing, but we can still find some way to cooperate. That is the thing.
So rather a gloomy picture with some optimism from China about the future of trade and also tech sector. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up here. Thank you so much for this short but interesting discussion. And thank you so much, the audience, for staying with us. I wish you a happy staying in this beautiful place. Enjoy the weekend. I would also like to introduce the concluding remarks right now. I think we have to stay.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I know you are all ready to depart or to have lunch, relax, so just bear with me for 5 minutes. We are coming to the end of another Tatra summit. I think we all had a great time. Also in this beautiful environment, and I'll just try to summarize very briefly what I believe are some of the outcomes of the Tatra summit. Of course, I don't pretend to try to cover all the richness of the discussions, formal, official, but also many informal. I saw many people drinking, sitting by the fireplace, having nice conversations, and maybe sometimes the contribution of Tatra Summit is actually more in these informal ones than the formal ones. But it's a combination of two which really makes, I believe, Tatra Summit very, very special. So let me start with some statistics. The total number of guests we had during the Tatra Summit is 230, which I think is quite a nice number because we intentionally didn't want to have too many people. It was, the whole Tatra summit is designed as an exclusive, small, relatively small gathering where people can have discussion with each other and feel like they are not part of a big show, but really being able to focus on substance. The countries, we had 22 countries represented here. I think, again, very nice. What I'm very happy about is that the balance between public and private sector is 50-50. And I know that this was for us in the leadership of Tatra Summit, one of the goals and challenges to balance public and private, because we used to have too many people from public sector, not enough from private. So we have 50-50 balance, which is really, I think, excellent. Where we are still lacking behind is the gender balance. We had around 30% women here. I think this is something we have to work on and have to make sure that next time we have a stronger representation from this part of society. Organizers, the average age 29 years, so we're actually helping also the young generation to grow and to see how such events are being done. We had several top VIP guests. I will just mention Donald Tusk, who was with us yesterday during the award dinner, Prime Minister Pellegrini, but many others. On the corporate side, we had 14 CEOs of global and national international companies, vice presidents of 5 global companies, 4 chairmen of board. Very good presence of media. We had 30 journalists, including Politico, Thomson Reuters, and Bloomberg. Vast coverage in the national media. I had several calls from my mother and family saying, "Oh, we saw you on the TV." So I think people are watching. The younger generation, my younger sons, looking at Twitter and Instagram, of course. So it's generational change, but very good media coverage. 30 interviews took place during the time we were here. Twitter impressions, 11,000. Facebook impressions, 40,000. Instagram impressions, 82,000, and total impressions almost 150,000. I don't know what it means, but the numbers are really, really good. Now, more importantly, on the substance. I think substance is really critical for us. That's why we are here, because we want to share what we know, but also to listen and to learn something new. I think we came up with one interesting word, which is becoming quite also heavy in the mass media, social media. It's so-called conclinko. It's a combination of cohesion, climate, innovation, and competitiveness. And I think these 4 themes, topics, have been going through in different iterations, different ways, but they were very important during our discussions. Obviously, cohesion, which is important for this region, for Central Eastern Europe, in terms of catching up with other parts of Europe and globally. The issue of climate, dealing with climate change, new initiatives in the area of fight against climate change, also from the institution I represent, from the European Investment Bank. But then, of course, also interaction between the climate-related goals and impact on competitiveness, issue of innovation, and how to combine these 4 issues was a very, very interesting and rich discussion. In terms of specific outcomes, and one of the goals and promises that GlobSec and people around Tatra Summit that we made was that we don't want this to be just a one-time event where we meet, discuss, we leave, have a good feeling, memories, but nothing happens in between now and the next Tatra Summit. And what we want to make sure is that there is a follow-up, that those critical topics, issues which were discussed here actually continue in smaller settings, in focused policy discussions. So there will be policy papers produced by GlobSec as a result of the discussions we had here. And there are 3 specific working groups which will be established and which will continue going deeper on the subjects. One is a working group on climate change. We had very interesting discussion, actually even before the official start of the Tatra Summit, where we were discussing the new climate-related policies of the European Investment Bank and some financial institutions vis-à-vis actors from the private sector, the heads of energy companies, utilities, how they see these nice policy goals reflecting on their business. And I think there is a lot which we can do to go further on this. So there will be a working group led by GlobSec focusing on the impact of climate policy goals and initiatives on real economy. Then there is so-called Lighthouse Initiative, which is a result of the focus group, which was considered to be the best and best attended, the so-called Future Industries working group, which focused on the issue of the impact of digitalization, automation, new technologies on global political stability and environment. So this will be the second one. And the third one will focus, working group, which will focus on sustainable green financing initiative. So these are the three areas that GlobSec will continue working on, bringing, as usual, representatives from public sector, private sector, stakeholders, academia, to go deeper and then to report at the next Tatra Summit one year from now. As Mr. Treichel said, to be successful and for Europe to be competitive and successful, we need strong and long-term thinking and leadership. And I think this is what we are trying to achieve, what we are trying to do. And I believe that this Tatra Summit did contribute to this. I hope that you also had fun. I think yesterday after midnight when I looked around, there were still quite many people and a lot of wine and cigars. So I think this was a successful Tatra Summit. I want to thank especially all of you, of course, who came here and who stayed until this last moment, but to thank especially the partners of the GlobSec and Tatra Summit, our strategic institutional partners, meaning Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of the Slovak Republic, Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic, and the European Investment Bank. Here in particular, I want to really pay special tribute to Minister Kamenický, who is still with us. He's fighting. You may not know, but he's still working on the final touches of the budget for the next year, and actually from here going to Bratislava to work overnight with his people at the Ministry of Finance to make sure that the budget is good and delivers good things for the people of this country, and then having the final meeting of the government on Monday. So, but thank you so much that you stayed with us until now and supported this. Our strategic partners, Czechoslovak Group, Philip Morris International, MasterCard, and the summit partners, ABNB, BAT, Erste, EPH, and Slovnaft. And of course, last but not least, and most important, huge appreciation to the people of GlobSec, to the staff, young people, as you saw. I think this is the future of this country and of this region, of Central Eastern Europe. So I would like to thank Robert, Milan, Erika and her team, and thank you so much. So with this, unless Robert or Ivan or anybody of the godfathers of Tatra Summit want to say anything, thank you again for coming here. Have a nice lunch, afternoon, and nice trip back home. Thank you.